Hello everyone, welcome back to the Politics GC. The topic of today's video is the New York Times Sienna poll that came out on Sunday. Now this is a very consequential poll, which is why we're dedicating an entire video to it, but just getting into things. So this poll was taken by them from September 3rd to September 6th. They surveyed about they called over 100,000 Americans. About 1.5 thousand responded to this poll. Also, the way they weighted it was that underrepresented groups who don't respond to these polls as much but do account for a larger percent of the population, their responses were weighted against a bit more, and the margin of error is 2.8, which again is very crucial. But what this poll found, just to reveal this, is that if the 2024 election were held today, 48% of respondents said that they would vote for the former President Trump versus 47% for Kamala Harris. And this is really astounding because until now, Kamala Harris has led in most of the major polls. If we look at the 538 average just today, Harris not only just wins the Electoral College, which is against her, but also obviously the polls all up 3, maybe tied in YouGov, but definitely averaging out, she has the upper hand. In the 538 polling, again, averages overall, if we go to their main page with the main election, or sorry, just one sec. Okay, yeah, she's up 1.1 at this point in time. So it's obviously all leading towards her. So this New York Times Sienna polling was very surprising, to say the least, that Trump is up 1 with these voters. And just to keep in mind, these are likely voters. These are not for sure people who are going to vote. These are not registered voters. They are likely voters, and in this era it's very hard to decide or be able to tell who is a likely voter, who's actually going to show up to vote, because Donald Trump brings out the low propensity voters, and so there's more volatility with who's going to actually show up on election day. And then we have the margin of error, of course, so either way this is their low and high end, and so it could all change. But when we're looking at the averages, it does show that Donald Trump is ahead, which is different than what we are seeing in other polling. So this is only one of the many questions that they asked respondents. Some of the other ones are very important to consider as well. So this is not from like the new poll, but just to keep in mind throughout this video is that these are the current polls from each of the swing states. Kamala Harris is leading in all of these except for Georgia and Arizona. But again, all of these from Wisconsin to Arizona are in margin of error. How many times can I say margin of error in one video? Count them. But all of these, the point is that they are up for volatility. They could all change depending on who stays home, who has the excitement to vote on November 5th or in the weeks leading up to it, depending on the state, of course, with early voting, but who just is going to have the excitement to show up on that day and who is not. So it really depends, and we still have around 8 weeks until Election Day. So there's much more time for things to change for many, many voters. As we saw last night during the debate, a lot of people made up their mind yesterday, or for now, they made up their minds. Okay, so one of the very crucial polls to keep in mind here was that 28% of likely voters said that they need to learn more about Kamala Harris versus 9% against Donald Trump. This 9% has been living under a rock for the past 10 years, I'm certain. I don't think anyone in America or even the world needs to learn anything else about Donald Trump. But 28%. That's not 20% of Republicans or independents. That's 28% of the surveyors, which were all across the political spectrum. 28% is extremely huge, and that's a major problem area for the Harris campaign, is identifying her. What does she stand for? What do her policies look like? There was someone down here that said, I don't know what Kamala's plans are. It's hard to make a decision on who to vote for when you don't know what their platform is going to be. The Kamala Harris campaign has recently sparked a lot of criticism because only recently have they added an issues page to their website. Arguably the most important factor when deciding which candidate to vote for has only, after a month and a half of being in this race, been added to their website. And so, considerably so, it makes sense that many of these voters do not know what the Kamala Harris campaign stands for, and 28% of them do not need more information about her. So it's incredibly understandable, but major problem area for her campaign that I don't think was alleviated too much by the debate last night. This was obviously Sunday before the debate, but even the debate I don't think cleared the air enough about what Harris's campaign really stands for. So going down to the rest of the polling, again, this just shows the New York Times Sienna poll has been the most conservative one thus far, but it's important to note as well, in 2016, everyone thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. All the polls were very much in her favor, and so we need to keep in mind that all of these polls favor Democrats on average. That's just how most of the polling works, and so estimate that these polls are probably all favoring Harris a bit too much at this current moment. Many people have said that Harris needs a 3-point lead is the key word there, in the polls, not with margin of error, but just a straight up lead in the polls to be able to win on November 5th. And so if these aren't showing that, then it's going to be a tougher race. Obviously, Ipsos is kind of the outlier in this polls. So regarding other polling, we saw that 60% of likely voters said that the next president needs to represent a major change from President Biden, an important, very important key factor. 60% of Americans can barely agree on anything, and so if 60% of them want change, there needs to be a change candidate who is going to change this race. 25% only said that would be the vice president, with 53% saying that the former president would represent that change. This, I think, is the most just atrocious poll for the Harris campaign. 53% are saying that Donald Trump is going to be changed from Biden, which obviously makes sense because Biden and Trump are the opposites of each other. Vice President Harris is part of his administration. But this is something that they really need to clear up. They need to show that they are different from President Biden on many key issues. And we see that, Harris is tiptoeing a fine line between saying, oh, I don't agree with that administration, but then if she says she doesn't agree, then what's going to happen? She's going to get flamed for the errors in that administration. If she says she does agree, then this percent is even going to go even lower. So there's a tough line to balance there when regarding this, but the key still stands that 53% say Trump is the change candidate, which if those polls don't change a bit, at least 10%, 20% would be great for the Harris campaign, then it's going to be much tougher to win in November. Going down, 47% of likely voters said that Ms. Harris is too liberal, 32% said Trump is too conservative. Again, this is another those are the main key issues for Harris, right? One is not being able to identify herself. People don't know what she stands for. People want specific policy from her. They want to know what she's actually going to do day one. That was one of the questions that Danny Bash asked her during the CNN interview that she wasn't even able to answer. She said that she was going to rebuild the middle class. I don't think that's possible to be done in one day. And so what are you actually going to do? What are your plans? Because both during that CNN interview and in the debate, people confronted her about constantly changing her positions, but she doesn't seem to have a solution to those questions yet, or to changing her positions. She said her values don't change, but values are policy that you support is based on your values. So how come your policy has shifted dramatically? She seems to be playing the role of a chameleon, just going along with the tides, whatever is the most favorable position for her to take on that current day, and it doesn't seem to be resonating too much with voters. So that's one issue of her, right, is not being able to identify herself, people not knowing where she stands on things. The other one is the change that we talked about here, being a change from President Biden, which his favorability is extremely low, so she has to get away from that, distance herself from that a bit, and then also being too liberal. And again, this is kind of inconsequential, but the being too liberal is something that you really need to focus on. It doesn't help that in 2019, she took one of the most liberal stances in the country, and now the tides have shifted. The American electorate wants a more moderate position, and so she's unable to shake her past clips and what got her famous in the first place, her being a radical candidate, and now running towards the center. It's not working out for her that much. It's coming off disingenuine. And so she'll have to work on that, definitely. 63% of people who heard about Project 2025 opposed it. Again, most of those I'm assuming are going to be Democrats, because the Democrats are the ones constantly bringing Project 2025 up in an effort to bring down Donald Trump and Republicans down ballot. So that's not surprising at all. And then 71% who say that they think that Donald Trump is going to enact those policies, and that's basically his policy plan, even though it's with the Heritage Foundation, even though people in his past administration and his advisors worked on Project 25, still not as much of a correlation between him directly and 25. Again, this isn't too surprising, nor is it that important, I think. 30% of Americans say that the country is on the right track. 71 say they're optimistic that could get on the right track, which is both improvements since July, but still not much of a change and not as necessary in this election. The only thing that's interesting is that these people have said that the country is going to get on the right track. Is that because Biden dropped out, or is it because Kamala Harris is in the race? Did they just not want Biden, or is Kamala Harris the change that they were wanting? Which, by the previous poll, it doesn't seem like that's the case. Now, looking at the issues, this is the key area for us all to look at. Which candidate do they think is going to do a better job on these issues? On abortion, no surprise here, Harris wins 54-39. Democracy, Harris wins 50-45. The economy, Trump wins 55-42. Immigration, he also wins 53-43. So first of all, his margin of error or his difference between these, this is 13%, this is 10%. This is obviously a much wider gap, 15%, and this is 5%. So overall, all in all, if you're going to add these up, it's going to be pretty similar, right? But one key thing to note is that abortion or democracy specifically is not as high on the priority list for voters. If it was January of 2021, of course, that's the main thing that they're focused on, but how long can you stretch that out? And obviously it was an assault on our capital, an assault on democracy, but how much of a clear threat is that when people aren't able to pay their groceries, pay their rent, everything is skyrocketing in prices. So the economy is their number one issue. Immigration is their second biggest issue, with the border crisis that happened earlier this year and late last year. And so if these are the top two issues in the voters' minds, and Donald Trump is winning on both of these issues, what does that tell us about the state of the race? They think that Donald Trump is going to do a better job on both of these things, which is why Kamala Harris has been talking so much about how she's a border hawk and trying to make that her personality, when it was exactly the opposite in 2019 and 2020. It's incredulous to see how she's absolutely flipped on her positions. But again, like I've been saying, their campaign needs to be doing more on the debates if they're going to be more debates. After last night, which the Harris campaign said that they want more, but they're going to get more, is Trump going to agree? Are they making empty promises? Do they not actually want more debates when push comes to shove? Was it just the immediate reaction of O'Malley Dillon to say that they wanted more debates when in reality they do not? Or do they actually want to have them? And if they do, then these are the core issues that they need to talk about. When you're looking at the timestamps of how long each candidate talked about the issues last night, Harris did talk about the economy for about a minute longer than Trump, which I think is going to benefit her overall. The more time she can get specifically saying, not just broad strokes about the middle class or these things, but specifically saying what she wants to do for Americans to alleviate some of the stress, economic and fiscal stress off the American public. If she's able to do that, then this margin is going to close up. On immigration, I think just with time, the more appearances she's making, the more she talks about the border, this can narrow down as well. And then the biggest thing for Democrats is going to be to push abortion as much as possible, get this lower and lower, and make it not only just make Harris a better candidate, but make it more important, because it doesn't matter if 100% of people think that Harris is better on abortion, but is that a winning issue for them? So looking at this one, I thought that this was a pretty interesting thing to look at here. They said that 70% of voters said that Mr. Trump has said something they found offensive. Nearly half of voters said that they have still been offended at him at some point in time, but would still vote for him. That, I think, was a pretty interesting one. I think more than 70% of voters have really found something offensive by him, but then obviously a large majority of his voters are still going to vote for him, even if something in the past has offended them. And then looking at fitness and character, voters were only slightly more likely to view the former president as a riskier choice than Harris. 54% viewed Trump as a risky choice, and then 52% for Harris. This is interesting to me, because I would think that maybe it's, they both have their risky fronts. Donald Trump is obviously risky because he's more volatile character overall. He's more interesting, and he doesn't go by the book. He doesn't go by what his advisors say. He really goes by what he himself is feeling on that day at that time. Versus Harris, she has been the vice president, but the vice president, as we all know, doesn't do much. They don't have much of a role, not many responsibilities. They are just the backup for the president, as we have witnessed here over this last month and a half, 2 months. But for them to say that she is the more risky candidate, I think makes more sense, just since she has never been in office. So I think the Harris campaign is doing something right if less people think that she is the risky candidate compared to Donald Trump. And then last but not least, 78% found something recently from Donald Trump that they've been offended by, and 37% said, yeah, but not recently again, bringing this similar idea to the table about, how they've been offended. And again, that was an interesting question for the surveyors to ask. But now that we've gone over this poll, I think this is pretty bad news for Kamala Harris overall, right? We had this initial bump where Donald Trump is winning, and then on the key issues, on things like liberalness or being changed, something that majority of voters say that they prioritize, and then Kamala Harris not engaging or not bodifying change. I think that's going to be an issue for her. And then obviously on the main issues, economy and immigration, she's going to, she has a tough road to victory based on just this New York Times Sienna poll. I think some things really have to change in her campaign. So overall, this poll is pretty damning for Kamala Harris. Their campaign really needs to focus on a few key things. One is making her seem less liberal, more to the center, making sure that she is very clearly identifying her changes that she made from 2019 to 2020. What has she changed and why? You can't just say your values have stayed the same, but your policy decisions have stayed the same. Right, the other way around would kind of make more sense if your policy or if your values have changed along with your policy rather than your values remaining constant and your policy remaining the same. That just doesn't make sense logically. So that's one thing, is making sure that she does not seem too liberal. Second is her involving change. I think she tried to talk about this during the debate but kind of failed. She had a great opportunity to, but kind of stumbled with, which relates back to her oratorical skills, but she really needs to modify change. That's the main thing. And then last but not least, she needs to stray away from Biden. She needs to make sure that she is not related to him in any way, shape, or form. She does not involve herself with the failures of the past presidency, not even with the, victories as much either. Just have a complete blank slate, because that's what the American public is looking for. And then on the Trump campaign side, I think that they really need to focus in. Trump has missed far too many opportunities at this point. He just keeps on going on rants. He keeps chasing the squirrel. He keeps taking the bait along with the boat, as Tommy Lahren said. And so he needs to really zone in. There are less than 2 months left in this election, and he does not seem to have his eye on the ball, which is where it matters most. So that's that. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope to see you next time. Also, comment below what your thoughts on this poll were.